Business leaders, we want to welcome you back to week 2 of the Salt Lake Chamber's 2020 Cybersecurity Leadership Council Fall Conference. I'm Nick Dunn with the Salt Lake Chamber. As we said last week, these webinars are live each Wednesday at noon through the end of November. So we have this ongoing series for you. We also want to incentivize you to attend as many as possible. And so these webinars will reward you if you attend a lot, because there's going to be an opportunity drawing at the end of the series for a Series 5 Apple Watch provided by Strong Connections. And so with each webinar you attend, you amass more tickets for the opportunity drawing. Today's webinar gets you 2 tickets. Next week is 3 and 4 and so on until the 8th webinar gets you 8 tickets. And at that point, we'll have the opportunity drawing for that Apple Watch. So we want to encourage you to attend as many of these as you're able. So I'd like to introduce today's webinar. The topic is securing devices at home and at work, presented by Paul Bingham with Western Governors University. Now remember, as he presents, feel free to enter in any questions to the Q&A feature here in the Zoom webinar, and we'll have a panel discussion at the end to answer some of your questions. Paul?
Hello and welcome to week 2 of the Salt Lake Chamber Cybersecurity Awareness Series. Since 2004, October has been recognized by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the National Cybersecurity Alliance as National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, a partnering effort between government and industry to raise cybersecurity awareness throughout our nation. This year's theme of "Do Your Part, Be Cyber Smart" is complemented by the overarching message of "If you connect it, protect it," with a focus on securing internet-connected devices, otherwise known as the Internet of Things, or IoT. This growing collection of consumer, professional, and industrial devices expands the realms of comfort and automation, while at the same time creating potential vulnerabilities thanks to the device's remote access capabilities. During Cybersecurity Awareness Month, each week also has its own theme. This week's theme is protecting your devices at home and work. To help us explore just how to do this, I'm joined today by 3 experts who will participate in a panel discussion. I'm pleased to welcome Sergeant Jeff Plank. Sergeant Plank, as part of his very successful career with the Utah Department of Public Safety, has also been a valued member of the FBI's Cyber Task Force for the past 7 years, and he's led numerous high-profile, successful cyber investigations. Mr. James Chandler, Vice President of Security at Western Governors University. James has over 20 years' experience in information security. In addition to working with various organizations, James has been featured on several local media segments to create greater awareness about protecting data and improving security measures for students, employees, and organizations. And Mr. Dale Roberts. Dale is the Cybersecurity Task Force lead at LeGrand. Dale also has over 20 years of information technology experience providing leadership and delivering IT solutions that resolve business problems. Prior to joining LeGrand, Dale worked for AT&T and SunTrust Banks and provided IT consulting services for several large, well-known companies across the U.S. Dale is also on the board of directors for the IOXT Alliance. Gentlemen, welcome.
Glad to be here.
It's my pleasure to be your moderator today. My name is Paul Bingham. I'm an associate dean in the College of IT, managing our cybersecurity degree programs here at Western Governors University. Lastly, I would like to thank WGU and the fantastic media studio team for sponsoring the technical aspects of today's presentation. So today we'll focus on 3 aspects of protecting our devices: the consumer aspect, or what we do at home; the corporate perspective, or what we do at work; and finally, the manufacturing perspective, to get some insight into exactly what goes into these devices that we use. So, Jeff, from the consumer perspective, you have a unique perspective by seeing ways consumers and households across the nation fall victim to criminal acts carried out through connected devices. What can you share to help us protect our connected devices at home?
2020, of course, has been insane. There's been a lot of things happening locally that have kind of set everybody back. COVID-19, of course, is probably the biggest thing that has changed our lives. We've had a multitude of different people now going back home and working from home, and we've had all of our kids learning from home as well for a certain amount of time. And so we've seen a huge rise in fraud that's occurring at home because of this recent activity. DPS, as well as the FBI, has put out a number of public service announcements related to different threats that are out there right now. And some of those that we've seen that are kind of crazy are these virtual meetings being hijacked. We've seen increased phishing attacks, mostly because of, home networks are less secure than a business network. And then we've also seen a lot of counterfeit goods, everything from toilet paper being sold fraudulently to PPE. So it's been a crazy year. And so this is awesome that we have this opportunity to share 5 tips about securing devices at home. I want to focus on home routers, guest networks, IoT settings, two-factor authentication, and vulnerability scanners. So our routers are basically the front door to all of our devices at home. So we want to make sure that they're locked up, right? That they're password protected and encrypted. A lot of times routers will come with a admin login and password. That's the first thing we want to do is change the password, make sure the passwords are complex, and make sure we're not reusing these passwords in other accounts. Again, if you're in the market for a new router, make sure you do some research because not all routers are created equal. Some are more secure than others. Let's talk about guest and secondary networks. If your family is anything like my family, I have a number of younger kids who don't have a cell plan on their devices, so they're reliant on Wi-Fi in the home. My kids have dozens of friends that come over. They have their devices, and they're reliant on my Wi-Fi to communicate with people at their home. And so my kids are giving away our password to the Wi-Fi, which is basically a no-no, but they do it anyways. So we've got all these different vulnerabilities with sharing passwords and all these devices. Kids like to download every single app in the universe. A lot of these are not secure. And then we've got 10, 20, 30 different IoT devices at home, like cameras, locks that we can now open remotely. We've got the Alexa devices. We have smartphones and tablets and everything. And and all these devices, they're a little more vulnerable because we don't typically update them like we should, and so the bad guys can access the devices based on the vulnerabilities in the patching or the updates. So it's a good idea to put our kids, visitors, and all these IoT devices on a secondary or guest network, which just gives us a little more security. The hackers are a little bit harder for them to access our primary network where we might have secure information that we don't want stolen. Let's talk real briefly about IoT settings. Be curious when you get a new Alexa device or Amazon device or whatnot. Be curious, what are the settings, security settings like? Is there something that you don't want in this particular device, like let's say access to a microphone or remote access? Disable these things if they're unwanted. Make sure that the passwords on these IoT devices are also changed if they're coming with admin passwords on them. And then when prompted, update the firmware on the devices. Sometimes you might not be updated, so you might need to proactively look and see if you're running the most current firmware on the device. Two-factor authentication. This is, of course, an extra layer of security. If it's offered, we should use it. As you know, two-factor authentication is not only something you know, but it's something you know and something you have. Typically, we will simply log in to a device with a password, And if the bad guy has been able to get a password from because you're reusing a password in a data breach somewhere, then they can, easily get in and access your accounts. But if you've registered your cell phone or whatnot with this particular account, it will send you a one-time password, which will allow you then to log in more securely. Quickly, let's talk about vulnerability scanners and patching. So you may say to yourself, well, I have 30 to 40 devices at home. There's no way that I can go into every single device and check to see if the apps and the software are updated. Well, thankfully, there are some free scanning tools like Nessus and Bitdefender that will automatically check to make sure your devices are up to date. They've got some great dashboards that will show you which devices are critical, that need to be repaired or patched, ASAP. So then you can kind of focus on those ones that are more serious and not waste your time on things that are already up to date. And lastly, I'd be remiss if I didn't explain where you can report a cybercrime. The Internet Crimes Complaint Center, it's run by the FBI. They essentially, it's a clearinghouse for all cyber complaints in the nation and in the world for that matter. That's found at www.ic3.gov. And we have analysts there at the FBI that are looking out for victims here in Utah, and they forward those complaints to us for investigation.
Outstanding. Thanks, Jeff. James, from the corporate perspective, or what we do at work to try and keep ourselves safe, in your position at WGU, you have a daunting responsibility. Not only do you oversee a corporate network with over 7,000 employees who are all remote network users, but because WGU is a 100% online education provider, you and your team have to ensure a quality experience for over 120,000 students who are also each remote network users. All of this while protecting the network against nefarious actors. What advice do you have for protecting connected devices at work?
Well, thank you, Paul. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'm honored to be here with Jeff and Dale today to talk about the perspectives that we all have on securing our worlds, right? Especially in today's world where the corporate network has extended to a lot of different places with a lot of different capabilities and systems and things like that from the home perspective. And over the last 6 months, and even before this, I think we all realize that there is no one that is immune. We recall just last week the Clark County School District in Nevada that was compromised with ransomware. And then they didn't pay the ransomware, and as a result, they exposed all their data and put that out there for everyone to have. So it's a catch-22 for most of us. So how do we together secure our home? Because my business network now extends to the home, and it extends into the IoT world as well. And all of that's coming together for us all. So for most of us, there are a couple areas where we have the most significant risk. And those areas are in the bring your own device and in the phishing aspect of the email systems. That's what happened in Clark County, is a phishing email that caused the ransomware. So why do we care so much about bring your own device? Well, one of the reasons is because that they are not managed. These are cell phones or other devices, iPads, that go between a home and the office that are unmanaged by the corporate security systems. So brings up a huge concern for us to have those traverse those different areas and have exposures that way. The other is in phishing, right? We have phishing emails coming out significantly over the last 6 months. We've seen an increase, as Sergeant Plank has described, and that's a huge worry for us as well. So the reason we care so much is those unmanaged personal devices, we don't know if they have an antivirus. We don't know if they've been patched. We don't know where they've been or what they've connected to, things like that. And if you look at this slide where we're linking bring your own device and phishing, and I would even add in here bring your own device /home/IoT and phishing to this slide as well, is that on my cell phone, I go home, I check my work email. It's a very common thing that we are sharing or looking for our email at home on our personal devices. In fact, most Gen Y individuals, 64% of them actually, think that their personal devices are better and work better than the corporate devices. People are 34% more productive on their own device versus the corporate device. And then companies save $350 a year per employee by not having to provide the devices so there's lots of reasons to have them, right? And then there are the security risks behind them. And so as this graphic is showing that I can go home, I do what I do at home. My systems at home definitely aren't secure as they would be at the corporate office. A perfect example of that is with a phishing email. When it arrives on my cell phone, there may be a link associated with that phishing email. If I were to click that link, likely I would go directly to whatever site that is the malicious site that is there in that link. If I was on the corporate end, we have tools that will validate that that link is good, and it will block it if we know it's a bad link or things like that. So when I'm at home and I click that link, I go and download that malicious file or unknown to me even, right? And then the next morning I get up, I drive into work, and I pull up my same cell phone, I start looking at email. Now I'm on the inside of the network. And now I have access to all the corporate systems and applications, which is where the real risk comes in. So there's a real worry about that and what we do about that and how we solve for that. So a couple things that we can do is we need to manage our BYOD. And with that, we need to have BYOD policies and standards from a corporate or business perspectives. If, as a corporation, we decide that BYOD is something that we're willing to accept that risk, then we need to put in place some tools, the mobile device management tools that will allow us to protect the systems, whether they're in the office or at home, and allow us to do that. The other is that we need to define what that policy is, that if we're not going to allow BYOD, the bring your own device, that we start blocking and not allowing those things to come in. So the NIST group, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology by the federal government, have standards for this. They call them special publications. They have one, it's 800-114, which is dedicated just to the securing of the bring your own device systems. And with that, you can implement strategies that help when you're at home, especially now with COVID, when all our employees are at home. Strategies that we can implement that would allow us to protect them at home and while they're at the office with systems like that. So lots to do. It can be very daunting to think about our world's now extending to the home and other places, right? Hotels and different places where people may be. And but there are tools that definitely are worth the expense to put in place from a corporate perspective. And in fact, in a lot of cases, they're required by regulation or compliance that Dell will be talking some about in just a minute. So with that, if there are any questions, the best place to go is to that NIST website, nist.gov. And there they have special publications for just about every scenario that you can think of, very well thought out and prepared. So yeah, it's a great time to be in security. It's a great month for security, and let's secure these systems.
Thanks, James. Those are some great tips. And it also helps me realize that the lines are blurred now between home and office. So while we may think the office is secure, if we're not secure at home, we may be bringing those problems to work with us or vice versa.
Absolutely.
So very interesting times indeed. Thank you. Dale, from the manufacturing perspective, I understand that Legrand sells about $500 million worth of IoT products to business and residential customers annually. With a specialty in equipping smart commercial buildings, you must be constantly trying to work to increase features and flexibility, at the same time decrease security risks. Must be a very challenging situation for you. What can you share from the manufacturing perspective to help us understand more about our IoT devices?
It is a complex world in the manufacturing arena right now. The regulatory issues are coming on, hitting us every week almost. The California SB 327 is a law that came out in January this year and became enforceable July 1 of this year, which goes to what Jeff was talking about admin or admin 1234. No device sold in California can have that. It's against the law there, and they hired like 50 AGs to go prosecute companies that don't comply with the law. So it is a changing landscape, and as a manufacturer, we've got to look. We're worldwide, so we're in 170 countries. I didn't even know there was 170 countries, right? Fun fact: there's 195. So if you have a trivia, there's 195 countries currently recognized by the UN, but we're in 170 of them. So we have to look at standards globally, and it's overwhelming at times. We have to do a lot of things. But anyway, going back to IoT, if you can tell from the slide, there were 7 billion IoT devices in 2018, and there's going to be 35 billion by next year. That is a tremendous growth rate. So as we all know, they're coming into our lives, they're coming into our worlds, our homes, our work, and we need to be accountable for them. Don't count, I'm a manufacturer, but don't count on us to always protect you, okay? You have to take the next step and make sure that you're protecting yourself. We give you the tools to protect yourself, but you need to do the things that both Jeff and James referred to. So I don't want to just throw a bunch of numbers at you, but I did this one slide that manufacturers, at least in California, we're liable for that device now. That changes the whole landscape. That used to be whoever sold it or whoever sold it last. Now, at least California has taken the tact of, hey, manufacturer, you make your device secure and we're going to hold you accountable. We talked about the regulatory landscape. This is how messy it is. This is an area that we actually need the government to step in and create some standards across the United States instead of each individual state passing its own laws. It is so difficult to track them. As you can see from this chart, and that's just a few states. We add all 50 or 51 in there where it gets even more complicated. My philosophy is for IoT is I said pick a horse to ride. You need a standard. So there's lots of good standards out there. James spoke about NIST. I'm actually work with NIST and ISO to creating those standards. I'm a voting member for the ISO committee that's building, I'll throw more numbers, but 27402. He talked about NIST 114. There's also NIST 8259. So there is a plethora of information out there if you want to take that extra step to protect yourself and your company. Again, I just stress, don't count on the manufacturer and don't count on, James does a great job, but he needs help, okay? We need help from you to protect yourself and the companies. Security by design is a new mantra, that's fairly new. That's what we employ for us is security by design. We build it from the beginning. It's not only safer, but from a cost factor, the multiples, they vary, but the minimum multiple is 10x. So if you solve a security problem on the front end versus the back end, it's minimally 10 times cheaper and up to 100 times cheaper. So from a cost perspective, you're going to get more by doing it on the front end.
Thanks, Dale. Anything else, gentlemen, that hasn't been covered here that would be helpful just as a final note to share?
I would just say that take the opportunity to look at what we have on our home computer or email. If you've got important contracts or if you've sent somebody your social security number or whatnot, take the time to clean your email up, delete documents that, if stolen, could steal your identity.
Yeah.
One of the thoughts that came to me as we discussed is we can do it, right? We can secure these devices. We don't have to turn everything off to be safe. And as long as we're vigilant, take a few steps that have been that have been given to us today, that we can and can be secure, so that we don't have impacts to our personal life or to the corporation that we work for. It's doable. We definitely can do it. We live this world every day. We know it can be done, and we don't want to overwhelm anybody at home thinking that it's too much. So you can do it. We know you can, and there's plenty of help out there.
Great. Thanks, James. And thanks to each of you gentlemen for your presentations, your insight, and your tips. It does seem sometimes like a scary world out there, but I think if we just put in place some of the very simple things that you've helped us understand today, we can navigate that world safely and be reasonably assured that our information and our devices are as secure as possible. Now, if all of our connected devices have worked properly, we'll be joining you, the audience, live for a short Q&A session.
Thank you, Paul, and all the other panelists. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to walk through some of those things with us. And we also want to now open it up to some Q&A potentially from any of the folks who have been watching at home today. And so we'll key that up and see if there's any who have put questions into the chat yet. But one question that I did have that I wanted to ask you guys, just as we're waiting for folks to fill that in, and remember, just for those watching, the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, feel free to hop in there and plug in any questions, and we'll ask them to the group here. But just to maybe kick us off, one thing that I wondered about is, as you guys were talking about storing sensitive files on shared networks, you know, whether it's a work network or Google Drive, Dropbox, any of those kinds of things. Would you recommend, is it better to just not even store sensitive files on something that's connected to the cloud if you just have a local hard drive? Is that better, or is there still a way to do it on a shared network that's completely safe?
You know, I'll pitch this to James in just a second, Nick, but one of the topics that we talked about among the group that didn't quite make it into the time frame was the importance of network segmentation. Segmenting out, well, I guess Sergeant Plank did talk about that a little bit with use of guest networks, but dividing, especially if you're talking about where we're storing things in the cloud, dividing up, in essence, where we store those types of data, possibly depending on their sensitivity. And then also of great importance, especially with sensitive data, is adequate use of encryption. Simply encrypting those things, even if somebody gets your data, as long as they don't have your key, which obviously needs to be stored securely and separately, then that data is meaningless to them. James, what do you have to add to that?
Well, thank you, Paul. I think everything you said is right on. And one thing that stands out to me, Nick, is recently we hear in the news about 5 different countries that are petitioning Apple and Google for encryption backdoors into their systems, right? So good intentions, right? That's to keep us all safe, keep terrorists at bay. But when we provide those backdoors, the bad guys will get those eventually. And those backdoors will become front doors for the bad guys. And anything we store in those public spaces will become available to them. So Paul's right. We need to keep them local, encrypted, so that if they are compromised, we're confident that they can't be cracked. And not worth the time. Really, the bad guys are going to go to the first open door, right? They're not going to spend a lot of time, especially on personal lives. And so they will move on to the next guy if yours is too hard to get. So.
Oh, that's helpful. Thank you. Another
Goes to passwords too. Just make sure your passwords are very secure and you change them. I mean, not to be a fear monger, but I mean, basically nothing's really safe on the internet. If they have your user ID and password, you can get it. So, but use very strong passwords and change them.
Thank you, Dale. One question that did come in from the audience is, how do we evaluate if anything we or our employees are doing from home now or in the past pose a risk right now?
Great question, James. You talked a lot about BYOD. You want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll jump in there, and then Dale, if you want to chime in as well. So with BI, there's a real difference between home and work, right? Where I work, we have tools in place that we can, when someone brings their BYOD into the office and things start going south on us, it detects, and we can quickly start to identify and remediate those things happening. The smaller your company, as it becomes a little bit more difficult, and you may not find out at all. In fact, you may not know anything's going on at all until a call comes in, or so it's really hard. There are some things that you can do. They, especially from the home perspective, Untangled is a great product out there that even has a commercial version for small business that you can put in what they call IDSs or IPSs. They detect problems, or they prevent problems, right? And those are simple enough and cheap enough that you can put on home network. I use Untangled at home so that any of those things going out, if they're known bad, my system will let me know and stop it. So that's what I would recommend, is whether you're home or at work, to have these tools in place so that there's at least a detection at a minimum, and if possible, a prevention, an automatic prevention for those.
I'd just like to add, if your employees are, you can't really protect yourself from your employees, to be honest with you. If your employees have the access to get to things, then they can do things with them, and it's very difficult to track that. What you can do is make sure that your employees are on, their accesses are limited to the need to know. No matter how small your company is, don't give, if you're 10 people or 10,000 people, for those 10 people, don't give all 10 access to payroll and access to HR information and to write checks and AP. So just do your silos for each and all sections of your business, so that only people who need to have access, and review that with frequency. Say at a minimum twice a year. Some people do it once a quarter, some people do it every month. It just depends on the size of your organization, but you'd be surprised what you could find, who has admin or who has rights to everything that you didn't think had it, if you don't review it with some frequency.
Thank you both, and thanks to Jared for asking that question. Another question from our audience, from Kate, and she asks, is it best to use a password vault? I didn't know that was the term for it, but I've heard of some of those services that kind of aggregate your password. So password vault, good idea, bad idea?
Maybe I'll take a stab at that one. I think when I see password vault, what I think of is a password manager, as opposed to, say, an Excel spreadsheet that's not encrypted, that's just sitting on my home drive with all of my passwords on it. That would be a very insecure storage or vault for that. I think most cybersecurity practitioners do use password managers. There's some level of research that you probably want to put into that. And even though you do use, I personally use one, even though you may choose to use a password manager, it is still important that all of your various passwords are not the same. It's just what Dale mentioned to us earlier. Complexity is important. Most of those managers have a randomizer that will generate strong passwords for you, but to ensure that you have unique passwords for all of your accounts and devices. And then especially strong password that serves as your master password or primary key to access those managers. I don't know, Jens, if you have anything to add to that.
Well, it's a catch-22, right? So if you use KeePass, or Norton has there's a number of them out there. If you use those and you put every single password and user ID in that account, and then they get your master password, and then they have everything. So, I agree. I think it's a positive thing to do if you have to. But it's a difficult answer, because, like I say, if you lose your master one, then they have everything. Your investment accounts, So I think that you want to have password management, but maybe you don't want to put your Fidelity investments, or maybe you don't want to put the passwords to your money in that account. That would be, if you have your ID for work or for your to log into Dropbox or log into various applications, Adobe, I think that's fine. But I would not put my investment accounts there. I would find another way to secure those.
One thing I was thinking about after you, Paul and Dale, one thing that's absolutely certain is we shouldn't be using the same password for everything we log into. Goes back to what Dale's saying about one password gives you everything. Well, if you use the same password for everything, you're obviously giving them everything. So however, whether it's a password vault or you have multiple password vaults or you have segmented password storing where you have financial data in one section, something of that nature needs to be done so that you're not using the same one and you're using complex passwords.
So maybe a good nutshell takeaway is if you use a password vault, still segment it a little bit so some of the more sensitive stuff might be separate. You know, one other thing that also comes to mind is if different businesses use different standards, and you guys talked about the different IT standards that are out there, and you said just pick one of these kind of established standards. If different businesses are kind of picking whatever one works for them, and they're not the same standards for businesses here in Utah, is that a problem? Or as long as they're kind of in that list of industry recognized standards, they're probably okay?
I think, Dale, you said in your presentation, pick a horse.
Yeah, yeah, you got to pick something. You know, there's a lot of standards out there, and they vary, by some margin. But I would say 70-80% of them all preach the same thing. So that gives you a good basis to start from. They all talk about strong passwords, and if you want to talk about passwords real quickly, from a mathematical perspective, the whole 7-letter or 8-letter with a special character and uppercase and lowercase is not the most secure password. They can crack those once they know if it's a characters and one this and one that actually allows them to crack it easier. The passwords that are proven to be the best passwords are just stupid things like my gray cat eats trees. Okay. My purple dog hates bushes. I mean, that stuff it takes like 100 years to crack that. So bear that in mind, that those standards about 8 and one of this and one of that, actually, they can do that in a few days. Whereas if you pick something like I just said, a sentence that you can remember that makes no sense at all, that actually is the strongest password you can have and is almost impenetrable.
I think what I echo what Dale's saying. The use of passphrases obviously helps us remember the passwords, as a string of random characters and numbers is very difficult for us to understand. And and the encryption and mathematics behind it. Once you reach 15 characters and anything above that adds exponential complexity with each additional character. So regardless of what you're using, passphrases, because it's easy for us to understand. And really, if you can hit 15 characters or more, Dale's right, it's going to take so long to crack those. Likely bad folks will move on and look for some low-hanging fruit.
I remember a Ellen DeGeneres show, and she was mocking passwords, and she called it, this was an actual midnight commercial for the password minder. It was called the Password Minder. You can go search this. You can actually watch Ellen talk about this. And it was a book that allowed you to keep every password in it. So what Ellen did was create the Password Minder Protector. And it was this box that you would put the password minder in with a little key so that you could protect your passwords. And it's really quite great how she presented and made it like, really, are we serious that we're going to put our passwords in a book that we set next to our computer? And so I think one of the first steps is use a password vault or manager. And then as complexities happen, like Dell referenced, then you start breaking it up or you start adding those complexities. But if you're a regular person, use the password manager. Don't give anybody that master password. Don't even write it down. Just make it something that's easy to remember for you. And then start there at least. And then as things grow and become more complex, you can advance and get a little bit more complicated.
Now, hopefully nobody wrote down those password options that Dale mentioned, because if you choose that, now everybody knows those passphrases, so you can come up with something on your own. But the password discussion got a lot of attention. One of our listeners named James posted a question, but then took it down because I think it was kind of answered. But just to make sure we cover every angle, are there any other recommendations of password management, passphrases, any just final thoughts on that topic? Anything we missed?
I think we covered it pretty well, Nick. I mean, we've said it a couple times. Don't use the same password for any of your accounts. Randomization is valuable if you're using, say, a password manager. Otherwise, if you're keeping them up in your head, or especially for those key passwords like Dale mentioned that you don't want to put somewhere, or your master password for your password manager. Length, complexity is important. Passphrases are helpful.
Excellent. That's a good summation, Paul. Thank you. Well, we don't have any other questions trickling in on the chat line, but just as we close, one final question that's very important. I noticed Paul and James, you both have what it looks like matching headsets, and I've seen a number of other folks on Zoom calls kind of in the tech community wearing headsets like that. Is that like an industry standard for folks? Is that something that you guys use all the time in that business?
James and I both work for Western Governors University, and so this would be called standard issue for us. I choose to use it at home because it frankly has great noise canceling, kind of blocks out everything else that's going on, and also the mic tends to only pick up what I intend for it to pick up, being my voice. James, I don't know about your experience.
I agree. It's just easier for me to focus. I don't hear a lot of the other things going on around me, especially being at home. I have some kids that'll eventually come home from school, and it does a great job at helping me focus.
There you go. Dale's joined the club now.
I'm the only one left.
I'll put a plug in for Jabra. These guys had these, and I borrowed them once. And I liked it so much, I'm like, I bought my own. So the Jabra noise canceling and microphone, it's top notch. But I was trying to look presentable today instead of like these guys. So.
Come on, it's cybersecurity. Nerds rule here in this space.
Dale, you still sounded great throughout all of it. So thank you all again for your time today, both your presentation and the discussion, as well as now kind of the back and forth, and some really good information for our business members and those who are attending today. So thank you again for that time. We want to encourage everyone again to tune in next week, this same time, Wednesday at noon. And the topic next week will be securing internet-connected devices in healthcare. And remember, the more of these you attend, the higher your chances of winning the opportunity drawing for the Series 5 Apple Watch at the end of November. Thank you, Paul, James, Dale, again for your time, and we'll see everyone next week.
Take care.
Sounds good. Take care. Bye.